We need to talk about race. Why are people protesting? Why are people angry? Slavery ended 150 years ago.
You so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans are the biblical Israelites.
Don't care. All they want to do is be ghetto.
Greetings and welcome to another WhatsApp reflection, where I add my views and comments to the post that you've sent me. The title of this video is Proximity. I'll be speaking about the relationship between black and white people, where proximity has been a 24-hour consideration since the 15th century, when Europeans first started to come to Africa en masse. This closeness in relationship, especially in the West, has resulted in white culture and white society changing the Africans. But it has also resulted in those transported Africans changing European culture, where the dominant system is intent on pushing a narrative of lazy, social welfare scrounging black people. The closeness in relationship between blacks and whites has resulted in some white people having an intimate understanding of some of the stresses that black people live under. In this video, I'll be celebrating those white people who are standing up. As much as it is a challenge for them within their own circles and their own families, they are standing up and letting people know that this is not right. As they say, you've got to give credit where credit is due.
Allow me to share something I swear is true. That which we don't know impacts people as much as that which we do. You've heard this, ignorance is bliss. Yes, but for the powerful and privileged, creating cultural prejudice and infinite systems built upon foundations that are unjust for those that have to live in our unwillingness to shift perspective and consciousness. Stay with me. Ignorance is problematic because its impact is systematic, and it's always stacked against the less fortunate who get traumatized and caught in it, fighting wars with no reward in it just because I had never thought of it like that. Ignorance is dangerous. If you reverse your car without looking backwards and you hit a stranger and you find them paralyzed, laid out on the pavement, it wasn't their fault for not knowing the time you would drive off. It was your fault for not looking back and checking your blind spot. Take me, for example, educated and yet unaware that my entire life I've benefited from a system that was never fair. My skin color makes me different. It's advantageous to be white if when you're not, there are cultural connotations that minimize your rights. Don't believe me? Look at my family tree and tell me where recently someone was sold as a product legally. I mean, traded like cattle, kidnapped and then trafficked. Now imagine being asked to act like that never happened when it's recent history. It was only 1833 the anti-slavery bill came to be, and that was 300 years after we started selling humans from Bristol, Plymouth, Liverpool, and London harbors. So we're still living in the shadow of a cultural disaster with generational dispositions etched into our psychological rafters. But it's 2020 and times have changed. Not when black people have been free less time than they were enslaved, and we don't get to set the date the conversation gets erased. We just get to set the date in which we change. It's not enough to say, I'm not racist, when we still benefit from the same systems that built the slave ships. We have to unlearn what they gave us. We have to reread history's pages. We have to be quiet enough to hear the voices we've silenced and contained. It's everywhere. It's complex, yes, but it's basic. So let me make it blatant. This very poem I'm saying, my flow and my cadence, man, where do you think it came from? All our favorite music has its origin in slave songs. We need to just listen and stop defending our position. Take a second of reflection and revision. This is here. This is now. This is on the streets of Britain. I was 3 when they killed Stephen Lawrence. I was 22 when they went to prison. God said to Cain, I hear the blood of your brother crying out from the dust. May we be able to do the same. God, may it be the same with us. May we hear the voices of the afflicted, the persecuted, the victim. May we be humble enough to listen. May we have the courage to make a difference. Shout out to Rennie Edo Lodge and all that has been written to help us move from ignorance into movement and into mission. I know it's just the beginning, but I swear justice is winning and our future can be different if we repent for our sins and change the way that we act in the way that we grow. You can choose to look the other way, but as of this day, you can never again say that you didn't know. Check your blind spot.
We need to talk about race. Why are people protesting? Why are people angry? Slavery ended 150 years ago. The civil rights movement was 60 years ago. Racial discrimination is illegal now. Heck, we even had a black president. So why are people still upset? We're going to go through history and we're going to look at some data. And we're going to go quickly so this video doesn't get too long. So, hang on. These are two households in America. One is black, the other is white. Today, the average black household has 60% of the income of the average white household, but only 1/10 of the household wealth. Why does that matter? Well, household wealth helps send kids to school, helps launch small businesses, stabilizes loss of income, and helps families survive catastrophic events like divorce or unemployment. What's amazing about this number is that there are lots of extremely wealthy African Americans, movie stars, pop stars, 75% of the NBA, 70% of the NFL, Oprah, Tyler Perry, Ben Carson, Morgan Freeman, and there are a lot of extremely poor white families. Think of Appalachia and other parts of rural America. But even when we factor all that in, the average black household still has only 1/10 the wealth of the average white household. How did that happen? Well, here we go. What happened after we freed the slaves, after the Civil War ended? 9 states enacted vagrancy laws, making it a crime to not have a job. The law was applied only to black men. 8 of those states then allowed prisoners, the black men who'd just been arrested for not having a job, to be hired out to plantation owners with little or no pay going to the prisoners themselves. So, that's right, men who had been freed from the plantations found themselves right back on the plantations. Additional laws prohibited mischief and insulting gestures, which allowed more black men to be arrested and created a huge market for convict leasing. Working conditions for these leased convicts could be worse than slavery because the plantation owner leasing the black prisoner had no long-term interest in his well-being. By the turn of the 20th century, every state in the South had mandated racial segregation by law, Jim Crow laws, which supported a social ostracism for blacks that extended to schools, churches, housing, jobs, restrooms, hotels and restaurants, hospitals, prisons, funeral homes, morgues, and cemeteries. White politicians competed with each other to be more strict and specific on segregation. For example, a law prohibiting blacks and whites from playing chess together. No interracial chess playing. That might lead to lawn darts. In 1896, the Supreme Court ruled that these Jim Crow laws were perfectly legal because they, quote, reflected customs and traditions and, quote, preserved public peace and good order. These laws stayed in place until 1954, when the idea of separate but equal was struck down in the ruling known as Brown versus Board of Education. So what happened next after Brown? Well, in 1956, the Southern Manifesto was signed by 101 out of 128 Congress members from the South, pledging to maintain Jim Crow by all means possible. 5 states passed nearly 50 new Jim Crow laws after 1954. Private whites-only schools, dubbed segregation academies, popped up all across the South, many of them Christian. But now widespread civil rights protests, combined with anti-war protests that were occasionally becoming violent, inspired the political rise of law and order rhetoric. Richard Nixon became the first candidate to campaign specifically on a platform of law and order. In 1968, 81% of Americans agreed that law and order had broken down in this country, and the majority blamed communists and Negroes who start riots. Let's go back to household wealth. The average black household has 1/10 the wealth of the average white household. Why is that? Because the number one source of intergenerational wealth in America is home ownership. And from the 1930s to well into the 1960s, the federal government enacted policies to actively encourage white families to own homes and discourage black families from doing the same. In 1934, the Federal Housing Administration created a risk rating system to determine which neighborhoods were safe investment for federally backed mortgages. Black neighborhoods were deemed too risky, marked off in maps with red ink, in a practice now known as redlining. After World War II, a boom of new suburban housing was built all over the country, much of it restricted by deed to whites only. In 1948, 40% of new housing developments in Minneapolis, for example, had covenants prohibiting purchase by African Americans. So blacks couldn't live in white neighborhoods and couldn't get federally insured loans for black neighborhoods. Until 1950, the Realtor's Code of Ethics specifically prohibited selling a house in a white neighborhood to a non-white family. You could lose your realtor's license if you helped a black family buy a home in a white neighborhood. In the 1930s, the FHA's underwriting manual said, quote, incompatible racial groups should not be permitted to live in the same communities. The FHA went on to recommend that highways would be a great way to separate black neighborhoods from white neighborhoods. The FHA funded huge white-only suburban housing developments, leaving blacks behind in inner cities. After World War II, the GI Bill provided subsidized mortgages to help millions of men returning from war to buy their first home. While technically eligible for the GI Bill, the way it was administered left 1 million black veterans largely on the outside looking in. In New York and New Jersey, the GI Bill insured more than 67,000 new mortgages. Fewer than 100 of those went for homes purchased by non-whites. In 1947, there were 3,200 mortgages in Mississippi guaranteed by the government for returning veterans. Of the 3,200, only 2 went to black veterans. As a result, white families after the war were able to build home equity, growing wealth for retirement, inheritance, and college education for their kids. One historian has stated that there was no greater instrument for widening an already huge racial gap in post-war America than the GI Bill. And then came the war on drugs. Inner-city blacks were extremely vulnerable economically. The overwhelming majority of African Americans in 1970 lacked college degrees and had grown up in fully segregated schools. In the second half of the 20th century, factories and manufacturing jobs moved to the suburbs. Black workers struggled to follow the jobs. They couldn't live in many of the new suburban developments. And as late as 1970, only 28% of black fathers had access to a car. When a white man in Cicero, Illinois, just outside Chicago, sublet an apartment to a black family, the white community rioted, setting fire to the apartment building and smashing windows until the National Guard had to intervene. The result of all of this: in 1970, 70% of African American men had good blue-collar jobs. By 1987, only 28% did.
Do you know how many
No, shut up.
No.
Can you shut your mouth for a minute?
No.
Because I actually work in the ghetto. I see the people.
Do you know why they're in that
physically go and I
position?
see these people.
Do you understand the systematic
They
and
get all
historical
kinds
reason
of
for why they're in
chances
that
and
position?
They don't care. All they want to do is be ghetto.
No.
Yes, there's some that don't, and there's good people.
No.
And then there's most of them just want to suck off the system or do something bad like drugs or gangs. And that's all they
They
care
have
about.
been oppressed. They have
It
not been
doesn't
given
matter.
the
They
same
get the
opportunities
chances.
you have
Yes,
had.
they do, and there's plenty of black people.
No, they
There's
don't,
plenty of-
Dad.
there's plenty of
And you not
minorities.
recognizing that as an issue is the reason why it's still continuing today.
I see them all over. There's all kinds of successful people that are of color. It doesn't matter what color, brown, white.
But it's a lot
orange,
harder for
yellow.
them to get to that
It doesn't
position.
matter. When they do, they're fine. But there's always filthy animals. And that
You're
is-
calling people of color black
No.
animals. You're calling them animals.
I'm talking. You didn't let
Are
me
you
finish.
kidding me?
You didn't let me finish.
That's not
I'm
okay.
talking about the
No,
trigger
no
parts,
matter what,
too.
that's not okay. No matter what, it's
It
not
is
okay.
okay.
Racism is not okay. Why do you think that racism is okay?
It's not- oh, that's mine.
Haley, I'm gonna look at. No, I'm looking at
That's
statistics
my
right
medal. I
now.
gotta get a necklace.
Your statistics they can be warped. Statistics can be warped. You want me to show you videos?
So why are my
Do you want me to show you videos of cops? I will do it.
Statistics wrong?
Because they can be warped. I'm not giving statistics right now. They can be warped. Personal experiences can't.
No, because this is actually putting it into play. When you,
Do I need to show you a bunch of videos of cops attacking protesters? Peaceful protesters.
listen to this. This is the number.
You mean I'm informed and educated?
You're not, though.
Yes, I
You're
am.
one-sided informed.
Mom, I was watching political stuff and you said to turn that off because you don't want to hear about it. That means that I am educated on it and you are not.
I'm sick of hearing it.
The fact that you can have that ignorance, ignorance for the majority is bliss.
Okay, so-
Ignorance for the minority
So I'm
is
looking at statistics
destruction.
that are wrong. This is just pure wrong information out there.
Just give me the statistic.
In 2017, 457 white people were shot to death by the police in the United States.
Okay.
223 were black.
76% of the population is white. 13% is black.
I
If
get that.
If they were being killed at the exact same rate by police officers, the rate of black people being killed would be 8.9. But it's not. It's 24%. The rate of white people being killed should be about where it is. So they're being killed at a higher rate. There's more white people, meaning that the amount of people killed by cops who are white would be higher.
The reaction of the person. I'm not saying
Because they're
I'm
tired.
not saying it's
They're tired
right.
of being treated
I'm
that
not
way.
saying it's right.
Good.
But if they started teaching them that this is the world that we live in, you don't want to be killed. Why do you think your friend's father taught him that?
Because
He
so
don't-
that his
so that he-
black son doesn't end up dead like Tamir Rice.
Because he doesn't want him to grow up with the chip on his shoulder that
He doesn't
no
want
police
his black
can-
son to end up dead.
Exactly.
That's not okay. Why do you think that's okay?
Because
Why is it something that you're okay with? Why is that
I'm
a
not-
reality that you're
who's
okay
saying
with?
I'm okay with it.
But you are.
No, I'm not. I'm
So
saying,
stand against it. So stand against it. If you're not okay with it, so
You
stand
wanna know
against
when
it.
I'll stand against it? When the black people in the ghetto stop carrying an illegal weapon. When the black people in the ghetto stop murdering each other.
I'll start caring about cops when they stop killing black people.
I'll start caring about black people when they stop killing cops.
Appreciate it, man. It's
Well,
good
you
stuff.
know what? It's about time.
It really is.
And I will tell you that if my brother had been killed like that, I would do whatever that person did in China to create a pandemic. Because as far as I'm concerned, if I had two buttons, one button, this will never happen to another Mr. Floyd, or the other button, you, Nelson, can stop the pandemic or the world will end. I would rather end this fucking world and have us all die than have one more incident like that. And I am so happy that finally, after this fucking bullshit was normalized for years, that this is the one that made the change. And I figured that it would, because fucking white people, if you look funny at a guy in a high school, he brings back a gun and kills a whole bunch of people.
Yeah.
But black people have been putting up with shit, and it's about time. I would love to have black police officers do to Mel Gibson and all these rich white people in Malibu what white cops have done to black people. So if this doesn't stop, I would love black cops to start doing the same thing to white people.
I respect
And
you.
I was born white, but the white race is sick, because the reason that I'm here is because white people stole this fucking continent from the Indians and enslaved people from Africa. The reason a black person is here is not because they stole the land. They were brought here against their will. So if I'm black, I tell people, I'm legal. White boy, you are illegal. Don't you dare tell a Mexican that they're illegal, because I got more Indian blood than you do. So go back to Scotland, Trump, you son of a bitch. So that's how I feel.
I respect it, and I love it.
And I can't say
love
how
the
I
movement.
really feel because I do not want the FBI to take me to prison.
I hear you. Well,
But
I
I know what
stand
should
with
be
you.
done to Donald Trump, and it's not lock him up. It's a lot worse.
I'm right there. I stand with you, my man.
The next clip has very disturbing footage. Brace yourself.
Shaver, who is dead because of the Mesa Police Department. He was traveling to Mesa from out of town. He worked for an exterminator company, and he had a pellet gun that he used to kill birds, I guess, as part of his job. And so he was in his hotel room, and apparently other hotel patrons saw him with the pellet gun inside his room. And so they called the cops. Cops show up, and what you're about to see is very graphic, difficult to watch, but here's how they handled it, and I want you to keep close attention to Shaver's behavior, where his hands are, and how he did not pose a threat at all.
Before we go to the video, one more piece of important context. What was reported into the cops was something that resembled a rifle, okay? Now, it turns out it was a pellet gun, but does it look like he's got a rifle on him? And does it look like they're training the cops in Mesa right?
Extremely graphic here.
Extremely graphic, yes. This is one of the toughest videos to watch. But this is what cops are doing. We gotta show you so we can fix it and have them protect and serve. But for the moment being, this is what's happening.
Stop right there! Stop! Stop! Get on the ground, both of you! Lay down on the ground! Lay down on the ground!
Who else is in the room? Nobody. Since apparently we have a failure for you to comprehend simple instructions, I'm going to go over some of them again, okay? Can you both hear and understand me?
Yes.
All right. If you make a mistake, another mistake, there's a very severe possibility you're both going to get shot. Do you understand that?
Yes.
I do.
Yes.
All right.
What the?
This is, shut up. I'm not here to be tactful and diplomatic with you. You listen, you obey. For one thing, did I tell you to move, young man? Did I tell you to put both your hands on the top of your head and interlace your fingers? Take your feet and cross your left foot over your right foot. If you move, we're going to consider that a threat, and we are going to deal with it, and you may not survive it. Do you understand me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, young man, listen to my instructions and do not make a mistake. You are to keep your legs crossed. Do you understand me?
Yes, sir.
You are to put both of your hands palm down, straight out in front of you. Push yourself up to a kneeling position. I said keep your legs crossed.
I'm sorry.
I didn't say this in conversation. Hands your hair! Hands up in the air! You do that again, we're shooting you. Do you understand?
Do not shoot me.
Then listen to my instructions.
I'm trying to just do what you.
Don't talk. Listen. Hands straight up in the air. Do not put your hands down for any reason. You think you're gonna fall? You better fall on your face. Your hands go back in the small of your back or down. We are going to shoot you. Do you understand me?
Yes, sir.
Crawl towards me. Crawl towards me.
Yes, sir.
Don't talk.
Jesus Christ, man. You think we don't need police reform in this country? What is wrong with you? If you, again, whether it's race or not race, look at those two people were white. It's power versus the powerless. And one thing he said there stuck out to me. He said, you listen, you obey. For God's sake, conservatives, you should be on our side here. You're worried about big government power? I mean, does it get any more big government power than that? You listen, you obey to the government and play this insane, murderous Simon Says game. And then he was trying to do everything right and they mowed him down. You're telling me Mesa Police Department doesn't have problems? You're telling me that they didn't get trained to brutalize the citizens.
As unemployment skyrocketed in African American communities, so did drug use. As drug use increased, so did crime. A dynamic today that we see playing out in white rural communities hit hard by unemployment and opioid addiction. Throughout the 1970s, white America became increasingly concerned by images of black violence shown on TV and in magazines. Drugs were the problem. Drug dealers and drug users were the enemy. So we decided to treat the drug epidemic not as a health crisis, but as a crisis of criminality, and we militarized our response. During the Reagan-Bush years from 1981 to 1991, how we invested money in anti-drug allocation completely changed. The anti-drug budget for the Department of Defense went from $33 million in 1981 to more than $1 billion in 1991. The Drug Enforcement Agency's budget to fight criminality and drug use went from $86 million to more than $1 billion. Then we came to the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which carried mandatory minimum sentences, much harsher for the distribution of crack cocaine, which was associated with blacks, than powder cocaine, which was associated with whites. Mandated evictions from public housing for any tenant who permitted drug-related criminal activity to occur on or near premises. It eliminated many government benefits, including student loans, for anyone convicted of a drug crime. The 1988 revision set a 5-year minimum sentence for possessing any amount of crack cocaine, even if there was no intent to distribute. Previously, it had been a 1-year maximum sentence for possessing any amount of any drug without the intent to distribute. Now, it might seem like we're picking on Republicans, so now it's time to pick on some Democrats. During the Clinton presidency, the funding for public housing was cut by $17 billion. At the same time, the funding for prisons increased by $19 billion. The number of Americans imprisoned for drug crimes exploded. In 1980, there were 41,000 Americans imprisoned for drug crimes. Today, there are more than 500,000, more than the entire 1980 prison population. Most arrests are for possession. In 2005, 80% of the arrests were for possessing drugs, not selling drugs. In a bizarre twist, we also militarized our police forces. Between 1997 and 1999, the Pentagon handled 3.4 million orders for military equipment from more than 11,000 police agencies, including 253 aircraft, including Black Hawk and Huey helicopters, 7,800 M16 rifles, 181 grenade launchers for the police, 8,000 bulletproof helmets, 1,200 night vision goggles. We also changed policing tactics. A no-knock entry is when a SWAT team literally breaks down your door or smashes in through the windows, like in E.T. when the cops come flying in from every direction looking for E.T. So back to Minneapolis. In 1986, Minneapolis SWAT teams performed no-knock entries 35 times. 10 years later, in 1996, they performed no-knock entries 700 times. That's 2 every day. There were financial incentives for arresting more drug users. Federal grants to local police departments were tied to the number of drug arrests. Research suggests the huge surge in arrests from increased drug enforcement was due more to budget incentives than to actual increases in drug use.
Something is wrong here. Dead giveaway.